It was an ordinary Sunday in Millwood, a small town where everyone knew everyone, and the rhythm of life was predictable. The kind of place where time seemed to slow down, where people gathered at the weekly farmers market, chatting with old friends, buying fresh produce, and enjoying the sunshine. For Clara Jensen and her mother, Lisa, the market was a familiar haven. Every Sunday, they would walk through the stalls, admiring the handmade goods, selecting the best fruits and vegetables, and catching up with the local vendors. It was their routine, their tradition. Clara, 8 years old with a smile that could light up the entire market, was always eager to explore. She loved the colors, the noise, and the bustle of the crowd. As Lisa picked out honey from a local vendor, Clara wandered a few steps ahead, her small feet carrying her to the next stall where bright flowers and homemade jewelry sparkled in the sunlight. Lisa kept a watchful eye on her, but in a moment that seemed like no more than a breath, she turned back from the vendor, and Clara was gone. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. Maybe Clara had just moved on to another stall, lost in the sea of people. But as Lisa called her name, her voice trembling in the warmth of the sun, her stomach churned. Clara wasn't at the flower stall. She wasn't near the toy stand. Panic set in. Lisa's heart pounded in her chest as she rushed through the crowd, scanning every face, every corner of the market. "Clara!" she shouted, her voice now a desperate cry. No one seemed to notice. The people around her continued shopping, chatting, laughing, as though Clara wasn't missing from the very space they all occupied. Lisa turned, eyes wild, and started asking the people nearby, "Have you seen a little girl? She was just here." But no one had. Not one person had seen Clara leave, or even noticed her in the few moments Lisa had turned away. The vendors, the shoppers, the children who usually ran around, none of them had seen anything unusual. It was as if Clara had simply vanished into thin air. The first few hours were spent in frantic searching. Lisa's mind raced through every possibility. Was someone watching her? Had someone taken her? Had she wandered off to the nearby park, or maybe to the woods? But the thought of Clara walking off by herself was terrifying. Clara never went anywhere alone. She was a child who loved to be with her mother, always close, always asking questions, always reaching for her hand. When the police arrived, the small town of Millwood quickly transformed. What was once a bustling market was now a scene of disbelief and terror. Officers canvassed the area, interviewing anyone who might have seen something, anything. They combed through the market, even retracing Clara's steps, but no one could offer any solid lead. No one had seen her leave, and no one had seen anything suspicious. It was a puzzle without pieces. Every question only led to more questions. The people who were there that morning were left with an overwhelming sense of confusion. How could a child just vanish? How could a mother turn her back for a moment, only for her child to disappear from sight forever? As hours turned into days, the town of Millwood, once vibrant and full of life, became quiet with worry. It wasn't just Clara's family who felt the weight of her absence, it was everyone. People who didn't know Lisa or Clara felt the chill of something gone wrong. It was the kind of disappearance that rippled through the community, leaving everyone wondering, was this the beginning of something darker? Was it possible that Clara had been taken? If so, who would do such a thing in broad daylight, in a place like Millwood? The police expanded their search. They reviewed surveillance footage from the market, hoping to find something, anything, that might explain where Clara had gone. But the footage only showed a blur of activity, nothing that stood out, no suspicious individuals, no vehicles that seemed out of place, and, most hauntingly, no trace of Clara herself. Weeks passed, and the police began to treat the case as a possible abduction. They scoured the woods, the local parks, the homes of every resident, looking for any clue. The media picked up the story, but even as the case made headlines, no new information surfaced. The phone lines stayed quiet, and the town, once hopeful, began to lose its sense of certainty. Each passing day only deepened the mystery, and the questions grew louder. Who had taken Clara? Where was she? And, most haunting of all, why? Lisa held on to hope, but as the days stretched into weeks, the gnawing fear that something terrible had happened took root. The town of Millwood, once a place of simple, peaceful living, had been marked by Clara's disappearance. No one was ever the same after that day, not even the farmer's market, where people would glance at the spot where Lisa and Clara had last stood and wonder, was she ever really here at all? The search would continue, but the haunting question remained. What had happened to Clara Jensen? And would anyone ever have the answers? The first few days after Clara's disappearance were a whirlwind of frantic searching and mounting uncertainty. The police launched a full-scale investigation, hoping to find even the smallest piece of evidence that might explain where the 8-year-old girl had gone. They reviewed every detail, every possible lead. One of the most telling pieces of evidence was the surveillance footage from the farmer's market. The camera angles were wide, capturing the hustle of the crowd, but as the hours ticked by, one thing became painfully clear. Clara had disappeared without a trace. The video showed her entering a narrow alleyway behind the market stalls, but after that, everything grew hazy. She seemed to disappear into the shadows of the alley, and though the camera followed the path for a moment longer, there was no sign of Clara leaving. No one noticed her exit. There were no witnesses. It was as though she had vanished into thin air. The alley, as the police would later discover, led to an old abandoned bakery that had been closed for years. It was a forgotten corner of town, overshadowed by the bustling market, but now it was at the heart of the investigation. The police scoured the area, checking every inch of the alley, looking for anything that might explain Clara's disappearance. They searched the bakery and its surroundings, hoping for a clue, a dropped item, a footprint, anything. But they found nothing. No signs of struggle, no clues that could lead them to where Clara had gone. The place felt empty, abandoned in more ways than one. Lisa, now desperate, turned to the community. If the police couldn't find anything, perhaps the people who had been at the market that day knew something. She hung flyers with Clara's picture on every street corner. Volunteers gathered, combing the town and the nearby woods. The news spread, and soon people from neighboring towns joined in the search, but despite the efforts, Clara remained missing. The reward was posted, and tips began to trickle in, but nothing solid enough to guide the investigation. The uncertainty was suffocating. As the days turned into weeks, theories began to swirl. Was this a random act? Had someone, a stranger, snatched Clara in the chaos of the market? Or was it someone from Millwood, someone who knew her, who might have had a reason to target the Jensen family? The question of whether it was a random abduction or something more personal was something the police couldn't shake. They interviewed people from all walks of life, vendors, shoppers, children who had been playing nearby, but no one could provide a clear lead. Each conversation felt like a dead end. The more the police dug, the more they realized that the market had been full of distractions that day. No one had seen anything out of the ordinary. It was as if Clara had simply disappeared into thin air, and the entire town was left to wonder how something so unimaginable could happen in their quiet little community. Then, 2 months later, an unexpected tip came in. A woman, a local resident who had been reluctant to come forward earlier, reported seeing something strange. She told the police she had noticed a man standing near the alley on the day Clara disappeared. The man had been wearing a long coat despite the warm weather. He was standing still, just outside the alley, staring down the path as if waiting for something. The woman couldn't recall much more. She hadn't thought much of it at the time. But when she saw the flyers of Clara's face, something about that day clicked in her mind, and she realized the man might have had something to do with Clara's disappearance. The tip was enough to reignite hope in the case. The police were eager to follow up. They canvassed the Badat area, asking if anyone else had seen the man. They showed his description to witnesses, but no one could remember anything specific. They looked into local records, hoping to find a match, but the search didn't lead anywhere. The man in the long coat remained a ghost in the investigation, an image that slipped through the fingers of the police like sand. No one could identify him, no one could confirm his involvement, and no one could explain why he had been there, in the alley, that day. As weeks passed and the trail began to cool once again, the questions grew louder. Who was this mysterious man? Why had he been there? Was he just an innocent bystander, or was he involved in something far darker? Theories continued to swirl, but the truth remained elusive. Clara's disappearance, once a horrifying reality, had now become a haunting mystery, one with no answers. The investigation had gained momentum, but it had also hit its limits. Each lead, each clue, only seemed to lead to more questions. The police were stuck, unable to break through the silence that surrounded Clara's case, and with every passing day, the possibility that Clara might never be found, never seen again, grew more real. Lisa clung to the hope that someone, somewhere, had seen something that could explain her daughter's disappearance. But as the search for Clara continued, it was clear that the town of Millwood and the people who had been there that fateful day would never forget the chilling mystery of the little girl who vanished without a trace. 2 years had passed since Clara Jensen vanished without a trace, and the case had faded into the background of Millwood's everyday life. Once a small town that thrived on its weekly farmers market, Millwood had become a place overshadowed by the absence of a little girl who was never found. The market, once a hub of activity and laughter, now felt emptier. The community, which had once rallied together to search for Clara, had slowly retreated into their own lives, the quiet whispers of her disappearance growing fainter with each passing day. The headline stories moved on, and the world seemed to forget. But Lisa, Clara's mother, had not. Every day she woke up to the painful reality that her daughter was still gone. Her heart ached with the same desperation she had felt 2 years ago when Clara had first disappeared. Lisa never stopped searching, her hope never fully extinguished, even as the town moved on. Every morning she combed through the details of the case again and again, hoping to find something, anything, that might bring Clara back. It was a constant cycle of grief, one where each hour felt longer than the last. Then, one day, Lisa began receiving letters. At first they seemed like nothing more than random, bizarre ramblings from someone with too much time on their hands. But the more she read, the more unsettled she became. Some of the letters were cryptic, filled with strange messages. That made little sense. Others were simpler, with a chilling message. "She's still out there." The letters were always unsigned, the handwriting varied, and there was no return address. The police dismissed them as the work of an obsessed individual, someone who had fixated on Clara's case but had nothing to offer. To them, it was just a distraction, an anomaly that held no real value in the investigation. But Lisa's instincts told her otherwise. There was something about these letters that couldn't be ignored. Each one seemed to speak directly to her deepest fears and hopes, the idea that Clara was still alive, that she was out there somewhere. The hope that had once felt like a spark deep within her had now grown into something more like a flame, still flickering in the dark corners of her mind. Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that these letters were not meaningless. Whoever had written them, whether they were a stranger or someone closer, knew something. They knew more than anyone had shared with the police. In the absence of any new evidence or leads, Lisa had no choice but to follow her own instincts. She began revisiting the people who had been closest to Clara: family, friends, neighbors, anyone who might hold a piece of the puzzle that had been so elusive for so long. Lisa interviewed them again, asking questions that seemed like old ones, but with a new urgency in her voice. She spoke to Clara's teachers, the parents of her friends, even the mailman who had delivered letters to their house the day Clara went missing. She scoured every inch of the town for anything that could explain what had happened, no matter how small or insignificant it might seem. Some of these conversations were heartbreaking, the people who had known Clara expressing their own sorrow and confusion. They remembered Clara's bright smile, the way she would wave as she skipped down the sidewalk to meet her mother. But none of them had seen anything out of the ordinary on that day, the day she disappeared. Still, Lisa pressed on, determined to leave no stone unturned. She couldn't afford to give up, not when there were so many unanswered questions and the nagging thought that Clara might still be out there, waiting to be found. It wasn't just the letters that kept Lisa moving forward. It was the constant feeling in her gut, the belief that Clara had not vanished into the ether, that she was somewhere, hidden away by someone, or something. The silence of those 2 years only made her question what might have been overlooked, what the police might have missed, what everyone had assumed couldn't be true. Could there have been something in Millwood that no one was willing to see? Could someone in town have been hiding the truth all along? The weight of that question began to press on Lisa more and more. If Clara were still alive, if there was any chance of bringing her home, Lisa knew she had to find the truth, no matter where it took her. The investigation may have stopped, but her search was just beginning. Each letter was a piece of a puzzle she had to solve, each conversation a step closer to the answer she needed. She wouldn't stop until she knew what had really happened to her daughter. But as Lisa dug deeper into the lives of those who had been closest to Clara, she found herself facing new challenges. Some people were reluctant to talk, their faces shadowed with guilt or fear. Others had their own suspicions but remained silent, unwilling to share what they knew. The closer Lisa got to the truth, the more it seemed that something, or someone, was trying to keep it buried. Each conversation seemed to bring more mystery, more questions, but fewer answers. And with every dead end, the silence grew louder. The longer Lisa searched, the more she realized that the truth about Clara's disappearance might be far more complex and darker than she had ever imagined. But one thing was certain. She couldn't stop now. Clara was still out there somewhere, and Lisa would do whatever it took to find her. The haunting question remained, what had really happened to Clara Jensen? And who in Millwood was hiding the truth? Months passed, and the once promising investigation into Clara Jensen's disappearance slowly faded into the background. The media moved on to other stories, and the town of Millwood, once rocked by the tragedy, returned to its peaceful routine. But for Lisa, Clara's mother, the absence of answers only deepened the pain. Every day without progress felt like a lifetime. Lisa never stopped searching, never stopped hoping, even as the case grew colder. But just when the investigation seemed to stall completely, an unexpected breakthrough arrived. The tip came in quietly, a whisper of information that no one could have predicted. A local bakery, just a few blocks from where Clara had been last seen, had been broken into months after her disappearance. The bakery was small, unremarkable, and often overlooked in the town's daily bustle. Late one night, a man had entered the shop, apparently seeking nothing more than pastries to steal. But there was something about the break-in that seemed out of place. The thief had been in and out quickly, but not before leaving behind a trail of crumbs that led to something far more unsettling, a hidden trapdoor in the basement. The discovery of this hidden space sparked renewed interest in the case, and the police immediately began investigating the bakery. They had initially dismissed the idea of the bakery being linked to Clara's disappearance, but the trapdoor changed everything. The idea that Clara might have been hidden beneath the bakery, in a room no one knew about, felt impossible. Yet the possibility lingered in the back of the investigators' minds. After some resistance from the bakery's owners, who were hesitant to allow another intrusion into their quiet business, the police were granted permission to search the premises further. What they found in the basement was both chilling and perplexing. Beneath the trap door, the officers uncovered a small, hidden room. The walls were damp, the air stale with the scent of old food and forgotten memories. The room, however, was nothing like the police had hoped for. It was a mess of old bakery equipment, boxes of unused supplies, and packaging material scattered across the floor. There were no signs of Clara, no clothes, no belongings, no trace that a child had ever been there. It was a dead end, yet the discovery of this secret room raised more questions than it answered. Was it possible that Clara had been kept here, hidden beneath the town in a place no one could have imagined? Or was it all a strange coincidence, an unrelated discovery that had no bearing on the case? The police weren't sure. There was no evidence to suggest that Clara had been locked in this basement, but the room's existence planted a seed of suspicion. Could someone have used this hidden space to keep her from being found? Or was this simply the remnants of a broken bakery, a place where nothing more than dust and old supplies had settled? As investigators scoured the area for anything that might link the room to Clara's disappearance, the cold reality began to set in. There were no fingerprints, no new leads, no signs of Clara's presence at all. The hidden room had been just that, a room. No one knew how long it had been there, and no one knew why it had remained untouched until the break-in. But for Lisa, this new development was like a flicker of hope in an otherwise darkened world. Could this room have been where Clara had been kept? Could it have been a place where someone had hidden her away, out of sight from the rest of the town? The idea was both terrifying and heartbreaking. The police hit another dead end. The investigation had briefly reignited, but once again, there were no answers, only more uncertainty. The hidden room remained a mystery, a place that might have held the key to Clara's disappearance, or might have been nothing more than an empty space filled with old memories. The police moved on, following up on other leads, but the question lingered in their minds. What if this room had been a place of confinement? What if Clara had been there, hidden away, waiting to be found? Lisa, too, couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to the bakery than just a break-in. The thought that her daughter could have been kept there, even for a brief time, was enough to keep her searching. She had to believe that Clara had been somewhere, hidden away by someone who had tried to keep her out of sight. But the lack of evidence and the cold reality of the police's findings left Lisa with more questions than answers. As the investigation stalled once again, the mystery of the hidden room and the break-in seemed to slip further into the background. But for Lisa, the question remained. Was this an overlooked clue, a missing piece of the puzzle? Or was it just another coincidence in a case that was already too far gone? The silence of the bakery, its secrets buried beneath the floorboards, would haunt her long after the police moved on to other leads. The story of Clara's disappearance had shifted again, but the truth remained as elusive as ever. Would the hidden room in the bakery ever reveal its secrets? And if it did, would it finally bring Clara home, or only add another layer of darkness to an already haunting mystery? The investigation into Clara Jensen's disappearance had stalled. Weeks turned into months, and the hope that had once burned so brightly in the beginning now seemed like a distant memory. For Lisa, every new lead that fizzled out, every dead end the police hit, drained her further. The search for her daughter was beginning to feel like a never-ending loop, one where each attempt to grasp answers only seemed to pull her further into darkness. The media had moved on, the town had started to forget, and the constant ache of loss never seemed to fade. Clara had been gone for over 2 years, and Lisa's body and mind were exhausted from the search. But still, she couldn't let go. Not yet. One day, with a sense of heaviness, Lisa returned to the place where it had all started, the market. She stood near the stalls, feeling the echo of her daughter's absence with every breath she took. The familiar sights and sounds of the market felt different now. The vendors who had once greeted her and Clara with smiles now offered only quiet nods of sympathy, their faces tinged with the same sorrow. Lisa had spent so many hours there, walking up and down the aisles, hoping that somehow some new piece of information would come to light. But this time, something was different. This time she felt like she had to reconnect with the past. She needed to remember the people who had been there, the ones who had seen Clara just before she disappeared. As Lisa spoke to the group of concerned parents and vendors, the conversations were familiar. Many of them still remembered Clara, her smile, the way she had excitedly skipped around the market, talking to everyone she met. They all remembered the day she vanished, the shock and horror that had rippled through the community. But as the discussions unfolded, one vendor shared something that caught Lisa's attention. 2 years ago, just before Clara disappeared, the vendor recalled seeing a man talking to Clara. The memory was hazy, but she was certain of one thing. There was something unsettling about the encounter. She described the man as calm, almost too calm, with a low, soothing voice that seemed to draw Clara in. He had a large bag with him, she said, and something about it felt out of place. The vendor couldn't remember the details clearly, but she recalled feeling uneasy, watching the interaction from a distance. The man had spoken to Clara for a brief moment, and then, as quickly as he appeared, he was gone, disappearing into the crowd before anyone could really take note of him. For Lisa, this was a spark of hope, something she had not felt in a long time. A man, a stranger, talking to Clara. It was a lead, a potential breakthrough that could change everything. Her heart raced as she listened, grasping at the possibility that this man might be the key to unlocking the mystery. Could he have been involved in Clara's disappearance? Was he the one who had taken her? The police were immediately notified about the new lead. They followed up with the vendor, asking for more details, hoping to identify the man. They spoke with other vendors, hoping someone else might have noticed something, anything that could lead them to him. The man with the bag was a mystery, but he was the only clue that had come to light in months. They retraced the market footage from that day, hoping that maybe, just maybe, they could catch a glimpse of the man, or at least the bag he carried. But despite the new information, the investigation hit another wall. The man, despite the best efforts of the police, could not be identified. There were no leads. The footage provided nothing useful. No one had come forward to say they knew who he was or where he had gone. The bag, though it seemed suspicious, didn't provide any new evidence. It was a moment in time that had slipped through the cracks, as fleeting as the man who had spoken to Clara. Lisa's heart sank as the reality began to set in. Another lead, another dead end. The case was no closer to being solved than it had been months ago. The weight of it all pressed down on her. She couldn't help but feel that there was something more, something she was missing. But with no new evidence and no witnesses, she was left with nothing but a vague recollection of a man in the crowd, a man who might have been the one to take her daughter, or simply someone passing through. It was the kind of lead that would haunt her forever, a breakthrough that wasn't. As the investigation grew colder once more, Lisa's grief deepened. She couldn't stop herself from questioning everything. Was there anyone who truly knew what had happened to Clara? Was there anyone who was still hiding the truth, or had the answers simply disappeared with her daughter? The more time that passed, the more the weight of uncertainty pressed on her chest. It felt like she was running out of time, but every door she opened led to another wall. The town of Millwood moved on. People began to forget. But Lisa couldn't. She couldn't forget the sound of Clara's laugh, the way she would tug at her sleeve, asking questions about everything around her. The questions that still lingered, would never leave her. The case, like the memory of her daughter, remained unresolved. The man in the market, the one who might have known something, he remained a ghost, slipping through the cracks just like Clara had. And as the days went by, Lisa was left to wonder if anyone would ever truly know what had happened to her daughter. Would the truth ever come to light, or would it remain buried in the shadows forever? Nearly 2 years had passed since Clara Jensen disappeared from the farmer's market, and the case had grown cold. Every day without answers felt like a crushing weight. Lisa, Clara's mother, had spent the days after her daughter's disappearance combing through leads, revisiting the market, speaking with anyone who might have had even the slightest connection to the mystery. But nothing came. The months bled into each other, and with every passing day, the hope that Clara would ever be found seemed more like a fading dream. It was a nightmare that never seemed to end. But then, something happened. It was a discovery that would haunt the town of Millwood forever and renew the pain that had been buried deep in Lisa's chest. A local baker, a man who had worked in Millwood for years, was making his regular delivery to the farmer's market. His cart, filled with freshly baked loaves of bread, rolled down the familiar path between the stalls, carrying the scent of warm dough and the promise of another ordinary day. It was just another delivery, but among the loaves of bread, one felt different. He couldn't quite explain it, but it was heavier than the rest. At first, he thought it might have been a mistake, a stray ingredient that had been left in the dough, but something about it didn't sit right. He decided to cut it open. Inside, wrapped carefully in the center of the loaf, was a small bundle, its edges soft and worn, its contents unmistakable. The fabric inside was old, faded, and yet undeniably familiar. It was Clara's favorite dress, the same dress she had worn that morning just before she disappeared. The same dress that her family had searched for in vain, the same one that had never been found, until now, hidden away inside the heart of a loaf of bread. The baker's hands shook as he realized what he had found. He didn't understand how it could have happened or what it all meant, but there was no denying the horrifying truth. Clara's clothing had been inside that loaf. It was impossible to fathom what had happened. Why would anyone do this? And more chillingly, what did it mean? Was Clara somewhere nearby, hidden away in some secret place? Had she been alive this whole time, kept out of sight, locked away in the dark corners of Millwood? The baker immediately called the police. As they arrived to investigate, the weight of the discovery settled on everyone in the market. Lisa was contacted, and her heart nearly stopped when she was told about the dress. The world she had tried so desperately to keep together had just been shattered all over again. The police quickly cordoned off the area, taking the loaf, the dress, and everything surrounding it for forensic analysis. The questions piled up in the air like smoke. Was it a sick prank? Had someone in Millwood been playing a twisted game, taunting her family with this cruel reminder of their loss? Or was there something darker at play? Was it possible that Clara had been kept alive, hidden in plain sight, the entire time? The police began their investigation, retracing Clara's steps, questioning everyone who might have had contact with the bakery. They dug into the bakery's records, looking for any clue, any sign that might link the bakery to Clara's disappearance. But there were no answers. No one had seen anything unusual, no one had heard anything strange, and no one had come forward with any information that could lead them to a suspect. They examined the bread for fingerprints, DNA, anything that might offer a clue. But there was nothing. No fingerprints, no traces of evidence that could lead them to whoever had put the dress inside that loaf. It was as though the bread had appeared from nowhere, a sick riddle with no solution. The most unsettling part of all was the complete lack of explanation. Why had Clara's clothing been placed in the bread? Was it meant as a message, a symbol of something? Or was it simply a bizarre and twisted form of hiding the truth? Had Clara been held somewhere, with no one in the town ever suspecting a thing? Or had it all been some dark game, a cruel joke played on the family who had already suffered so much? As the investigation unfolded, the fear that had once been buried in the hearts of those closest to Clara resurfaced. The town was left with a haunting sense of confusion. No one could understand why someone would hide Clara's dress in a loaf of bread. What did it mean? And more chillingly, where was Clara now? With no new leads, no suspects, and no clear answers, the case stagnated once again. The trail, once full of potential, grew cold. No one could find any connection between the bakery and Clara's disappearance. The bakery itself was a small, quiet place with few customers and little foot traffic. It had no significant ties to Clara's family or anyone close to her. The more the police searched, the less they seemed to find. And with no solid evidence, the questions began to outweigh the answers. Lisa, once again left with nothing but a heavy heart, was forced to confront the terrifying reality that the case was no closer to being solved than it had been before the bread was cut open. Clara's dress had been found, but Clara herself was still gone. The discovery, though chilling, had only raised more questions, and the investigation stalled once again. Lisa was left wondering if the truth would ever come to light, or if Clara's disappearance would remain an unanswerable mystery forever. The discovery of Clara's favorite dress inside the loaf of bread had already left the town of Millwood reeling, but the forensic tests that followed would bring a whole new layer of mystery and terror into the investigation. The initial findings had been inconclusive, offering little more than a chilling clue. There was no sign of Clara's body, no traces of her DNA, but something unexpected turned up, a set of DNA samples from a person who had recently been in the bakery. The results were puzzling at first. How could anyone's DNA end up in a loaf of bread? More troubling still was the fact that the DNA didn't match anyone in the town's current population. It belonged to a man who had worked at the bakery years ago. His name was Martin Gray. Martin Gray had been a quiet, reclusive man, someone who had slipped into the background of Millwood's daily life without ever attracting much attention. He had lived alone in a small cabin just outside town, keeping mostly to himself. No one had seen him around much in recent years, but he was a figure many of the older residents remembered, a man who had once been a steady part of the local community, though he had always kept his distance. After he had passed away several years ago, Martin had become a distant memory for most of Millwood's residents. But now, his name was at the center of a haunting new question. How was it that his DNA had ended up in the bakery? The police acted quickly, sending a team to Martin's old cabin to investigate. They hoped to find something, anything, that could explain why his DNA was linked to the bread where Clara's dress had been hidden. They searched the cabin thoroughly, hoping for any clue that might connect Martin to the bakery or to Clara's disappearance. But when they arrived, the cabin was as empty and abandoned as they had expected. The place was silent, the air stale, and there was nothing to indicate that Martin had been involved in anything sinister. His belongings were mostly gone, left behind in a hurry, as though he had planned to leave long before his death. There was no sign of foul play, no evidence of anything connecting Martin to Clara's case, at least not directly. Still, the discovery of his DNA in the bakery couldn't be ignored. How had it gotten there? Martin had died years before the bread was baked, yet somehow his genetic material had been left behind in the bakery, specifically in a loaf of bread that had been delivered to the market just months after Clara disappeared. It seemed like a bizarre, impossible connection. The police could find no answer that made sense. Had someone used Martin's DNA, perhaps unknowingly, to cover their tracks? Or had he somehow been involved in Clara's disappearance, even though he had been dead for years? The questions mounted with no clear answers. The police were left with a chilling realization. They had no idea how Martin Gray, a man with no obvious connection to Clara's family or anyone who might have known her, could be tied to this case. His DNA in the bakery was an unsettling link, one that raised more questions than it answered. What could his role have been? Why had his DNA turned up in such an unusual place? Was there a connection between him and the person who had hidden Clara's dress in the bread? Or was it all an eerie coincidence? And perhaps most disturbing of all, had Martin been involved in something far darker than anyone could have imagined? The discovery of Martin's DNA added a layer of mystery to a case that was already full of uncertainty. The more the police dug into his past, the more they realized how little they actually knew about him. No one in town seemed to know much about his life after he had moved to the cabin. What had he been doing during the years he had lived there? Had he been hiding something? The unsettling fact that his DNA had ended up in a loaf of bread, a piece of evidence connected to Clara's disappearance, felt like a clue they couldn't yet understand, a thread that they couldn't quite pull without unraveling something far darker. The connection between Martin Gray and Clara's case seemed tenuous, at best, but the fact that his DNA had been found in the bakery raised the stakes in a way the investigators hadn't anticipated. They had expected to find clues that would lead them closer to Clara's fate. But this new revelation was something entirely different. It didn't answer any questions, it only raised more. And as the investigation continued, Lisa was left grappling with the terrifying possibility that there were forces at play in Millwood, forces linked to Clara's disappearance, that no one could understand. As the weeks passed and the police investigation ground to a halt once again, Lisa couldn't shake the nagging thought that there was something deeply wrong about Martin Gray's connection to the case. The man had been dead for years, yet somehow his DNA had surfaced in the very place where Clara's belongings had been hidden. The truth seemed further out of reach than ever before. And with every unanswered question, Lisa's heartbreak only deepened. Would she ever find out what happened to her daughter, or would the truth remain forever buried, just like Martin Gray's secrets? The investigation into Clara Jensen's disappearance had stalled for months, and with every passing day, the weight of unanswered questions only grew heavier. Martin Gray, a man who had been dead for years, had become an unlikely figure at the center of the mystery. His DNA had been found in the bakery, where Clara's dress had been hidden inside a loaf of bread, and though no clear connection had yet been made between him and Clara, the unsettling discovery of his genetic material continued to haunt the investigation. Just when it seemed that the case was slipping away entirely, an unexpected breakthrough came. It came in the form of an old friend of Martin's, a woman who had known him years ago before he had isolated himself in his cabin on the outskirts of Millwood. She had kept her distance from the investigation, but the discovery of Martin's DNA had prompted her to come forward with something she had long kept to herself. The details she shared were chilling. Martin had always been a quiet, solitary man, but he had once been oddly fixated on the farmer's market in Millwood. The woman recalled how, years ago, Martin had been seen lurking around the market, standing near the crowd, watching the children who played and ran between the stalls. She had found it strange at the time, but had thought little of it, until now. But there was more. The woman revealed that Martin had once asked her for a favor. He had asked her to hide something for him, something he wanted kept safe, out of sight. The woman had refused, uneasy about what Martin had wanted her to hide. She couldn't remember exactly what the object had been, but she recalled that he had been insistent. His demeanor, she said, had been strange, and there was something unsettling about the way he spoke about it. Preserving things, he had said, keeping them safe. The words sent a chill through her as she remembered the conversation, the way Martin had been so focused on the idea of protection, of keeping things out of view, locked away. As the police listened to the woman's account, a new layer to the investigation began to unfold. They immediately turned their attention back to Martin's past, hoping to uncover any further clues that could shed light on his connection to Clara's disappearance. What had he been doing in the years leading up to his death? What had he been hiding? The deeper they dug into his history, the more unsettling the picture became. It wasn't long before the police uncovered a series of bizarre behaviors that only added to the mystery. It turned out that Martin had been known to store food in sealed containers, an odd habit that had raised eyebrows among those who had known him. At first, it seemed like a harmless quirk, a man who simply liked to keep his food sealed tight, perhaps for preservation. But when investigators began to look more closely, they realized that Martin's obsession with sealing things away extended beyond food. The sealed containers were strange and numerous, hidden in the corners of his cabin, packed away in a way that suggested something far more sinister. Some of these containers, upon further inspection, were found to contain strange objects, things that didn't belong in food storage: old clothes, small trinkets, bits and pieces of items that seemed out of place. It was as though Martin had been collecting things, stashing them away for some unknown purpose. The more the police uncovered, the more they began to wonder if Martin's obsession with preserving things had a darker meaning. Could it have been a way of holding on to something, hiding it, keeping it safe and out of sight, as he had once said? The possibility that he had been involved in more than just baking, that he had been hiding something, someone, was too chilling to ignore. The investigation had taken a turn for the worse. The more the police uncovered about Martin's past, the more they realized that there were no simple answers, no easy solutions. His behavior was disturbing, and the connections between him and Clara's case seemed to grow, though no concrete evidence had yet emerged. Was it possible that Martin had been involved in Clara's disappearance? Had he hidden her away, just as he had hidden the strange objects in his cabin, locked safely out of sight? Or was there another, darker explanation for his actions? As the police continued to piece together the fragments of Martin's life, the chilling possibility grew stronger. Martin's obsession with preservation, his strange behavior, and the mysterious request he had made to his friend to hide something for him were no longer just strange quirks. They had become a disturbing pattern. The more they learned about him, the more it seemed that Martin had been keeping secrets that now felt like they were tied to Clara's disappearance in ways no one had anticipated. For Lisa, the mother of Clara, the new information was both a glimmer of hope and a new nightmare. Could Martin have been the one to take her daughter? Could he have been hiding Clara all this time, in one of his sealed containers, somewhere hidden away? The questions only grew, but so too did the realization that, no matter how much they learned about Martin Gray, the truth remained just out of reach. The investigation had taken a turn, but it still felt like they were stumbling in the dark, chasing shadows with no clear answer in sight. And with every unanswered question, the grief grew heavier. Would anyone ever truly know what had happened to Clara? Or would the truth remain forever buried, hidden by the very obsession that had driven Martin Gray to keep so much locked away? The investigation into Clara Jensen's disappearance had been stalled for nearly 2 years, and every new lead had fizzled out, leaving her family clinging to fading hope. But in a twisted turn of fate, the case took a devastating leap forward when new forensic tests were conducted on the loaf of bread that had once held Clara's favorite dress. The discovery had sent shockwaves through Millwood, But what the new autopsy revealed would change everything. Inside the bread, alongside Clara's dress, there were traces of a substance, a chemical compound used in preservation. But this wasn't just any substance. It was highly toxic. The discovery of the toxic substance sent chills through the police. They had suspected for months that Clara might have been kept hidden away, but this new revelation seemed to confirm their darkest fears. The bread was no ordinary loaf. It had been used as a vessel, a grim method of hiding Clara's remains. The realization was gut-wrenching. Clara had likely been dead for months, if not longer, and her body had been preserved in a sickening attempt to keep her hidden from the world. The police now believed that Martin Gray, the reclusive man whose DNA had been found in the bakery, had been behind the entire scheme. His obsession with preserving things, which had seemed strange at first, was now being understood in a much darker light. Martin had not just been hiding Clara's belongings, he had been hiding Clara herself. The more the police dug into Martin's past, the more they realized that his obsession with preservation went far beyond anything they could have imagined. He had always been a man who kept to himself, never drawing attention, living alone in a cabin far from town. But as the investigation unfolded, it became clear that his strange habits weren't just eccentricities. They were signs of something much more sinister. Martin had been fixated on Clara for years. Whether it was a twisted fascination or something more personal, he had found a way to hide his dark secret. His plans, however, had been interrupted. Martin had passed away unexpectedly several years before the toxic substance was discovered in the bread. His death had been sudden, and it seemed that his obsession with Clara's disappearance had gone unnoticed by everyone around him. No one had ever suspected him of being involved, not even after Clara vanished. But now, with this chilling discovery, it was clear that his life had been consumed by the disappearance in ways no one could have ever guessed. His obsession with Clara's fate had ultimately led to this horrific revelation. But even with this new information, the true reason behind Martin's actions remained elusive. Why had he chosen to preserve Clara in this way? What had driven him to hide her for so long? And, most hauntingly, how had he managed to carry out this twisted plan without anyone noticing? These questions, though they seemed closer to being answered, only deepened the mystery surrounding Clara's disappearance. The police were left with the sickening truth that Clara had likely been dead for years, and yet her family had spent all this time searching for answers, clinging to the hope that she was still alive. Lisa, Clara's mother, had fought so hard to find her daughter, never giving up, even when it seemed like the case was hopeless. The discovery of Clara's dress in the bread had been the first glimmer of a hope in 2 years. But now, the truth was too much to bear. Clara was gone, and her death had been hidden away in a horrifying attempt to keep her from the world. The case, once thought to be a heartbreaking cold case, was now unraveling in a way no one could have foreseen. Clara's fate, however, remained a deeply haunting question. Why had Martin Gray chosen her? Why had he gone to such lengths to preserve her remains? And how had he managed to keep this secret for so long? The police could only speculate, piecing together the fragments of a story that seemed more disturbing with every new piece of evidence. For Lisa, the revelation was unbearable. The grief she had carried for 2 years now felt like a crushing weight. She had hoped, prayed, that Clara was still out there somewhere, that she would be found, and that the mystery would be solved in a way that brought her daughter home. But now, the truth had torn that hope away, leaving Lisa to confront the horror of what had really happened to her child. It wasn't just the loss of Clara. It was the knowledge that her daughter had been hidden away, preserved, locked in the shadows for so long. As the investigation continued, the police were left with more questions than answers. What had driven Martin Gray to do such a thing? What had happened during those 2 years that no one had known about? And how had he managed to carry out his twisted plans without anyone noticing? The answers, it seemed, were buried beneath layers of secrecy and obsession, and they may never fully be uncovered. For Lisa, the truth was now a bitter pill to swallow. The hope she had held on to for so long had been shattered. Clara was gone, and the mystery that had once seemed so elusive now felt like an endless nightmare. The final revelation of what had happened to her daughter had torn through Lisa's soul, leaving behind only questions and heartbreak. Would the truth ever be fully understood, or would Clara's story remain one of the most haunting, unresolved mysteries of Millwood? The case of Clara Jensen, once a beacon of hope and desperation, was officially closed. After years of searching, of relentless questioning, and of trying to piece together the fragments of her life, the truth had finally come to light. But it wasn't the resolution that Lisa, Clara's mother, had longed for. The discovery of Clara's remains, hidden away in a loaf of bread, marked the end of the investigation. The police had reclassified the case as a homicide, but the full truth, the why, the how, remained elusive, buried in the shadows of Martin Gray's life and his twisted obsession. For Lisa, the closure that had come so suddenly felt hollow. The grief that had been buried beneath layers of unanswered questions now came rushing to the surface, a tidal wave of sorrow that she had been holding back for years. Clara was gone, and nothing would ever bring her back. But even in the face of this painful truth, Lisa couldn't understand what had happened during those 2 years. She couldn't make sense of the man who had hidden her daughter's body in such a horrific way, nor could she fathom why he had chosen Clara in the first place. The discovery of Martin's obsession with preservation and his twisted methods of hiding Clara away had only raised more questions. Why had he done it? What had driven him to keep Clara's remains hidden for so long? The town of Millwood, once united in the search for Clara, was forever changed by the revelation. The sense of community, the shared sense of loss, would never be the same. People who had known Clara, who had passed by her mother at the market, now found themselves haunted by the thought of what had transpired in their quiet town. The police had done their best, but no one could answer the most haunting question of all. How had something so dark and twisted happened in the heart of Millwood, and why had no one noticed? Martin Gray had lived among them, and yet no one had suspected him, not even as he quietly carried out his disturbing plans. His motives remained a mystery, leaving a chilling void that no one could fill. For Lisa, the pain of knowing that her daughter had been hidden away in such a way was almost too much to bear. But even more than the physical loss, it was the unanswered questions that tormented her. What had happened to Clara during those 2 years? Had she suffered? Had she known what was happening to her? The idea of her daughter, alive and waiting, hidden somewhere in Millwood, was an image that Lisa couldn't shake. The police had their theories, but the truth was never fully revealed. And that lingering mystery, the unknown parts of Clara's story, would stay with Lisa forever. Every year, on the anniversary of Clara's disappearance, the town of Millwood paused to remember. The market, once a place of joy and community, became a solemn reminder of what had happened. Vendors would set up their stalls, shoppers would go about their business, but there would always be a moment when someone, whether it was a local or a visitor, paused, took a breath, and remembered the little girl who vanished without a trace. The memory of Clara, her smile, her laugh, the way she had skipped through the market remained with them. But with that memory came the haunting discovery of what had truly happened to her. It was a reminder that sometimes the most horrific truths are the ones that remain hidden in plain sight. For Lisa, that memory was not just a painful reminder of what she had lost, but of what had never been fully understood. As the years passed, the questions about Clara's disappearance would never fade. Martin Gray's actions would remain a mystery, and the truth behind his obsession would never fully come to light. Lisa could only mourn her daughter, but the haunting question of why would linger with her always. What had driven Martin to choose Clara? What had kept her hidden for so long? And why had no one ever truly been able to stop it? In the years that followed, Millwood moved on. But the shadow of Clara's disappearance hung over the town. People would whisper about the girl who vanished, the unsettling discovery that followed, and the man whose obsession had gone unnoticed for so long. No one could forget, and no one ever would. And though the case was officially closed, it remained open in the hearts of those who had known Clara, who had lived through her disappearance, and who had been left to wonder what could have been done to stop it. What could have prevented the horrific truth from ever being hidden? The mystery of Clara Jensen's disappearance would never truly be solved. The investigation had ended, but the emotional weight of that discovery, the unanswered questions, would linger for a lifetime. Clara's name, forever etched into the town's collective memory, would always be a reminder of a tragedy that could never be fully explained.